Alright guys, so let's start this series talking about how to control the side control position, right? Of course, we can only think about attacking and submitting our opponent if you are able to maintain the side control position. So we have two elements here in order to keep the side control. First is keeping my opponent flat on his back. And the second element is controlling his hips or blocking his hips so he cannot recover his guard. So I want my opponent flat on his back with both shoulders pinned against the mat. Okay? Anytime he starts turning to his side, it means that I'm starting to lose the control and he may start escaping. Okay? I want to be with my chest on his chest most of the time. If we are on this position with both of his shoulders pinned against the mat, now he can start feeling my weight, the pressure of my body here. Right? His lungs are getting crushed in between my chest and the mat. Anytime he's on his side, I'm putting weight on top of his shoulder here. So I'm not really crushing his lungs, right? There's no pressure behind his back. His back is free. So all my pressure is on top of his shoulder. It's not good enough, right? I'm not wearing the guy down. I'm not using my body weight here properly. And because he's on his side, it's hard for me to make the shape of his body, right? If he's flat, yes, my body fits right around his body. If he's on his side, it's way too much space. He can start using this space to do a little hip escape and maybe recover his guard. Or sometimes, because he's on his side and there is all this space, he might even start going to his knees and we're going to start losing the position, okay? So first thing, maintaining the guy flat. How do I keep the guy flat? We need to pay attention on the points of control here. Several points of control that we have in order to maintain the guy flat on his back. It's going to depend on the technique, it's going to depend on the type of side control we are playing. But as a general concept here, see that if he wants to turn to his side, he has to lift the left side of his body, right? He lifted his left hip off the mat, he lifted his left shoulder off the mat. So my job is pushing that shoulder back down or his hip down. Sometimes the knee, right? If I move his knee towards the mat, he's gonna go flat, right? Pushing his shoulder down is the equivalent of my underhook here, right? That's the job of my underhook. If I use my underhook, my shoulder against his shoulder, he's gonna go flat. Another point of control is head control. Right, my cross face here. If I turn his chin to the other side, he's also gonna go flat. So that's the purpose of the cross face here. Right, shoulder against his chin, moving his head all the way. It turns the guy flat. So always looking for chin, always looking for the shoulder. Sometimes the hip. For example, with my knee on stomach, knee on belly, right? My knee forces his hip to go flat. Knee control I can use, for example, from the reverse Kazakh position, as we're going to see later. I can drive the guy down using the far knee or the near knee. If I move his knees all the way to the other side, I turn the guy flat. Same with his elbows. So if he turns into me and I lift this elbow up, it helps to turn the guy flat. Okay? And of course, if the guy tries to turn away from me, for example, trying to roll out into the turtle position, it's the same concept, just reversed, right? I have to control this hip here to not let the guy go to his knees. This hip, this shoulder, right? Pulling him down. Sometimes the bottom elbow here, I'm gonna control, pull up to bring the guy flat. So the points of control are the joints, knee, hips, shoulder, chin. I'm always looking for that in order to maintain the guy flat on his back. 95% of my submissions are going to come when the guy is flat on his back. And the second element of control is blocking his hip or staying away from his hip so he cannot recover guard. So anytime I have my side control here, we're going to see the different types of side control later, but I'm always blocking his hip or his legs. Right now, for example, with my knee, it could be my hand blocking his hip right? Because if he tries to bring his legs underneath my body, I'm blocking his hip. I can block when I'm facing the guy that way. I can block with my bottom knee here, right? Several ways to block the guy. If I go to north and south, for example, I won't be able to block his hips, but my legs are so far away, he won't be able to recover guard. So those are the two basic elements, keeping the guy flat and blocking his hip. Alright guys, so now let's take a look at the 5 different types of side controls that we're going to be working on this series, okay? We're going to also see how to establish the control and use the concepts, the elements of control that we learned before. So let's start here with the classic chest on chest, which is the most common type of side control they're going to see. So classic chest on chest control. What are my points of control here? I have my underhook, which prevents the guy turning into me because I keep smashing, spinning his shoulder down with my head low here over his shoulder. And the other point of control is my cross face. Right? I'm gonna turn his head that way with my shoulder, using my shoulder against his chin. So also makes harder for him to turn into me. Since he cannot turn his head, he cannot turn his body. Right? So I have underhook and cross face, keeping the guy flat. If he tries to turn to his left side, his right arm is going to run under my armpit, so it also helps to keep the guy flat here. My leg positioning, how I'm going to block his hip. I want my knee checking his hip. I want my hips very low towards the mat, so he cannot slide his leg underneath my hip. And I want my other leg extended so I can always push off that foot and drive into the guy, putting the shoulder pressure, making harder for him to turn to his side. Always on my toes here, but with my hip low so he cannot recover his guard. My head always low too, because anytime my head goes up, he can frame his forearm under my neck and start pushing me away. If he creates a lot of separation, he's already turning to his side. I'm losing this shoulder control, right? So always head low to prevent that. In case he gets his arm under my chin here, first thing that I should do is try to smash his wrist against his shoulder, right? There is a moment where I'm going to be too late and he's going to start creating separation, but if I can catch that early, pinning his wrist against his shoulder, it's very hard for him to extend his arm and create that frame, right? I just make sure that I turn my head either way so he doesn't smash my windpipe here, right? Turn my head, collapse his wrist against his shoulder in order to kill his frame. If I'm too late and he's already pushing hard and creating that separation, turning on his side, then we have to change. We're going to see later how to do, but I'm going to switch to the reverse Kyazagatame position to deflect this frame here that's bothering my neck and creating separation. Another important detail, I want to keep my hips low here, close to the mat, so he doesn't slide his right arm, he doesn't get his knee underhook. Because if he gets that underhook there, he can start spinning to his left side and escaping. Alright, so I want my hips closer to the mat. I'm still driving on my toes into the guy, but if I have my hips up, it makes it much easier for him to shoot his arm. Right? In case he shoots his arm and he gets that underhook, I'm going to counter with the underhook of my own here. I'm going to shoot my arm under his arm, catching here either his shoulder or his lapel. Right? So if he shoots that underhook, I'm going to shoot my underhook, countering that. And then I can start working my paper cutter choke here. You're going to see later how to do it, but there's a counter once he shoots his underhook on me. Also, I want my hips low so he doesn't connect his elbow to his knee, right? If he connects his elbow to his knee, he's already recovering his guard. He creates this frame here. He's going to start pushing me away. So the knee blocks his leg, but my hips are low. Again, if my hips are high, there is a space for him to sneak that knee in and maybe start recovering his guard. Second position, the Kesa-gatame control, okay? Let's take a look here. Kesa-gatame, I want to control both of his arms, okay? The far arm here, I'm going to check my head with my own hand, making it harder for him to circle his left hand and frame on my neck, right? Anytime he tries to do that, he kind of giving me the American, I'm going to see later how to do it, but if I have this hand instead on his shoulder, for example, he can frame my neck at any time, right? No good. Sometimes, even if I keep my head low here, right, he can start digging, finding my head, my neck. So I'm going to control the side of my head here. And this is a position where I can put a lot of weight on top of the guy here and start wearing him out, helping me to submit the guy once he starts panicking here. So how do I put weight on top of the guy? I want to lift this elbow here and also lift my hip, right? 1 inch off the mat, my hip 1 inch off the mat. So now he's completely carrying my weight here. And eventually he's gonna get tired, he's gonna start panicking, helping me to submit the guy. The other arm, I also wanna pick it up, a nice grip here on his tricep, right past his elbow. Have a nice grip, pinch my elbow here against his forearm, and I have control over that arm. I pull both arms up, right? Disconnecting this elbow off the mat, hip off the mat, to add that pressure on the guy. My body positioning here is my ribs by his ribs, okay? His rib cage here against my ribs. I don't want to be too low sitting on his stomach, closer to his hip, because he can sit up now easier. I sit up there, Homer. That's right. If I'm too low to his hip, he can sit up, move his torso. Also, if I'm sitting too high here, next to his neck, he can always do a backward roll here, or bridge me high. Alright, so I want to be right here in the center, ribs by the ribs. Look at my leg positioning now. Wide base. I want to have this leg here extended right on the angle of his bridge. If it tries to bridge me that way, my foot is right there. Ideally, toes down, heel up, so I have a grip here on the mat, right? If it tries to bridge, my foot is right there. My other leg's also wide here, back, because if it tries to sit up, my foot stops that, right? Wide base, kills his bridge, kills his sit up. Sitting right here in the middle of his chest, ribs by the ribs, and pulling both arms up. If both of his arms are up, I'm controlling both of his elbows here, he cannot turn to his side. Try to turn to his side. He cannot go. He cannot go that way because these are elbow is up. He cannot go this way because I'm picking his elbow up. Sometimes I'm going to use my hand to bother his neck here a little bit. So my leg now replaces the control of my arm. I cannot allow the guy to touch his elbow on the mat, so my leg is closer to his body. If it's too far and I try to attack his neck, once he touches his elbow on the mat, he might start recovering his guard, just like we saw before. If you bring his knee close to his elbow, he recovers. I'm in trouble. Always have my leg under his arm. In case I miss or in case he breaks my grip, his elbow runs against my leg. And my hip, like we said, is off the mat, 1 inch off the mat, but low, right? I'm not too high. If my hips are too high, I'm overcompensating this way and he can roll me that way. So the Kesa-gatame, you have to find a sweet spot here where you're heavy and you still have good balance. Now, sometimes, if the guy is very explosive and much bigger and stronger than me, he can throw me that way, especially when I'm digging my ribs against his ribs, trying to be heavy. If he's explosive, there is the risk. So I don't need to be always with my hip up, putting pressure on the guy. I can sit my hip on the mat, especially if I see that he's throwing me that way. So my weight is on this side of his body. He tries to bridge me to that side, I'm heavy here. He stops, I put weight, right? You start wearing the guy out with this type of control here. Once I establish this position and I see that he's really panicking and I see that my weight is starting to wear him out, I can always add more pressure by walking into the guy, right? Maybe I get a tap from this, right? So I have my Kasugatame, I see that he's starting to make weird noises, I know that it's effective, I know he's not liking this, let's add more pressure. So I'm gonna start walking. Digging my ribs against his ribs, right? Walk, almost like a clock shoulder. And this, a lot of times, is gonna make him tap or he's gonna give me a submission in order to escape from this. Now let's take a look at the mousetrap side control. Okay, usually comes from the Kasugatame as a transition. So let's say I have my Kasugatame here. I'm not finding the attacks as we're gonna see later. And I'm gonna start transitioning now to the mousetrap position to open up other types of submissions, right? So I can start, the whole deal here is controlling this arm here very, very tight, and I'm gonna go to my knees. So I can use the same drill that we did before as I walk, putting pressure on the guy to make sure that this arm is very tight, right? So I have my Kasugatame, I'm gonna walk, putting pressure, lifting this arm and bringing my hip here, my left hip, really next to his shoulder, okay? As this knee comes around his head, pinning his arm. Let's take a look here. I just put the pressure on the guy. I'm gonna lift his arm. My elbow goes to the mat now, so I can pivot on this elbow. And I'm gonna put a lot of pressure here. I'm gonna let go his arm and control the side of his neck here with my elbow, okay? I want his arm completely trapped on top of my leg here, making very, very hard for him to touch his elbow on the mat, okay? That's the mousetrap position. I'm on my knees, my knee here is checking his hip. As the other one is around his head, I keep sucking his neck in, pushing my elbow against his neck, so his arm is completely trapped on top of my leg. Right? Anytime he moves his head this way, he can start bringing his elbow towards the ground. I don't want that. I want his head completely tight here against my leg. His head and his arm are trapped in between my elbow and my thigh. Right? I'm here with my hips low, almost sitting on my heels. And I keep this hand here that was checking my face from the Kasugatame. I keep it trapping his arm. So it's hard for him to turn to his right because he cannot touch his elbow on the ground. And it's hard for him to turn to his left because I'm controlling his elbow here. He's trapped, he's pinned down, flat on his back. That's what I want. And my knee here checking his hip so he cannot recover guard. Right? Hips low towards my heel. Since he cannot use this elbow here to connect with his knee, it's very hard for him to recover his guard. Right? That's why I want this control, his head and his arm really, really tight here, using my elbow against his neck. If he tries to sneak this knee under my stomach there, my hips are low, and he cannot connect his elbow with his knee there. Anytime I'm in the mousetrap position, the control of this arm here is very important because I can attack this arm and it helps me to maintain the position. In case he brings his elbow in, his forearm, and starts framing my hip, I don't want to be on this position anymore because he can use this elbow here. If he's a strong, bigger guy, he can use this against my hip and throw me to this side here. Right? I'm in danger. So anytime he gets his elbow in, I'm going to switch back to the Kasugatame, pick his elbow up, and I can stay here or recover mousetrap. Right? I never allow the guy to get his frame on my hip. I don't want to be on my knees with that frame there, otherwise I can get rolled. And a little variation of the mousetrap here is coming from the classic chest on chest. So I have my classic chest on chest here. I can always try to trap his arm by bringing my knee next to his hip and opening his arm, sucking the guy in. Okay? What's the difference here? The difference is that I have my cross face now. Before, I had my arm over his body, checking his neck. Now I have the cross face. This is a variation of the mousetrap. We have attacks from here. We're gonna see later how to attack. But generally speaking, it's not as tight as this one here because my arm is on the way. Right? Here we have his head and his arm. Once my cross face gets on the way, it's harder to pin his arm tighter. Okay? We have attacks, like I said before. We are gonna see some options, but if you can, here we have many more options, and it's a better control overall. Now let's take a look at the reverse Kasugatame position, an underutilized side control position where we have great options to mount our opponent and submissions. Reverse Kasugatame facing the guy's legs, okay? So how I'm gonna control the guy here? I wanna control both of his arms here. We have two options. First is reverse Kasugatame with my underhook, and we have reverse Kasugatame with my arm over his arm, overhooking, okay? Let's start here with the overhook. So I want to control both of his arms, okay? First is no gi option, okay? No gi option, I don't want the guy turning into me, of course, so I want to cover his shoulder with my body weight, right? My arm is past his shoulder here. If my elbow is by his neck, his shoulder is uncovered and he can start turning into me, right? Always strapping that shoulder with no gi. Put weight, push off my leg here. We're gonna see later how to position my legs, but I push off my leg, putting weight on top of that shoulder, making it harder for him to turn into me, right? With the gi, I can always add some extra variations here. Now I can rest my elbow by his neck, because if I control his lapel here, also controls his shoulder, so it makes much harder for him to turn into me, right? So with the gi, I can control his lapel, or even my lapel. If I open and catch here, also is the same effect, right? He tries to turn into me, his shoulder is pinned down, it's great control. No gi, always covering that shoulder, okay? Now look at the other arm here. I want to stretch his arm up and sit on his arm, okay? I want his arm almost perpendicular to his body here. I'm gonna sit my hip, my left hip, right on top of his bicep, right? So sometimes the guy is pushing me down already. I'm gonna just lift my hip a little bit, drive against that arm, and sit on top of his bicep, okay? What does that do is make very, very hard now for him to turn to his left, because I'm smashing that arm here. And it's hard for him to turn to his right because I'm smashing the far shoulder. So I have control over both arms here, keeping the guy flat, very hard for him to turn on his side. Look at my leg positioning here. Knee checking his hip. My hip is slightly off the mat because I'm sitting on top of his arm here, and I'm heavy covering the far shoulder. Knee checking his hip so he doesn't slide his leg underneath my leg, catching me in a reverse half guard here, or sometimes even taking my back. Knee glued on his hip. This leg he posted wide and with a nice space because he might try to bridge into me. That leg helps to push the guy back. And my arm here, I'm going to use my hand to frame on his legs. I'm going to have my stiff arm here against his legs. Because maybe if the guy is strong, he can start trying to push me down all the way towards his hip, right? If he pushes me all the way towards his hip, I'm pretty much lost the position. He does a little hip escape, and he's out of my side control position. So I'm always framing on his leg here. If he tries to push me down, now my arm is on the way. I have a nice solid structure here, making it very hard for him. And the variation here is with my underhook. Right? With my underhook, this arm is even more important now because both of his arms are behind my back. He will try to push me down towards his hip. Right? So always moving my hip as close to his head as possible and framing here on his leg. If he tries to push me down, now he's being blocked. Look, when I have my underhook here, I want both of his arms stretched up like this. Alright, so I'm still sitting on his bicep, and this arm here, I'm going to try to bring his arm all the way up as high as I can. Right? It's much easier to open his arm up if I meet my elbow by his elbow. Right? I stretch his arm way more compared to if my elbow is by his armpit. My elbow by his armpit is harder to open his arm. If I flare my arm out a little, it's easier to open his arm. Open his arm all the way, sit on his bicep, and I'm on here in the reverse Kazagatame position. Look at my ribs. Very, very high, almost my ribs by his neck there. Right? So that's another reason why I frame his legs, because if I'm not framing his legs, maybe he does a backward roll. Since I'm so high on his head, if he does a backward roll, maybe he can come on top. So frame, keep his legs down, and I establish my position here. Also, anytime that I see the guy I'm losing control and he starts turning to his side, I can use my hand here to pick either knee up, top knee or bottom knee, and start driving the guy flat again. Just like we learned from the points of control. If I control his knees, I can turn the guy flat again. Right? A nice grip here. No gi, I can just cup, right, his leg, either leg. Sometimes even once he starts turning to his side, I'm losing control. He's turning his shoulder too. I can even have this type of grip here. Right? Bringing the guy up, flat, and I'm here back again into the reverse Kazagatame position. In case I cannot spread his arms out and he's already pushing me down towards his hip, instead of trying to go to the mount and landing on the half guard here, right? I can always start transitioning to the north and south position. Just he's framing behind my neck here. I just pass my hip above his arm, and I'm going to start playing my north and south position. Now let's take a look at the north and south position that we're going to use a lot during this series too. We have three options: over under control, double over, and double under. Let's start with the over under, which is the most common, and we have way more options to attack our opponent. So let's start with the over under. One arm over his arm, one arm under his arm. As we talked before, we have double over and double unders. Right? When I have my over under position here, the arm that's under his arm says that it's very hard for him to turn that way because his arm is getting trapped underneath my armpit. It's much easier to turn this way because this arm is kind of free. If he shoots his arm here, he might start turning to his right side. So how do I control that? I'm going to put weight on top of his head, on top of his chin here, turning his head that way. I put my hip, relax my hip, that weight on top of his face, on top of his head, make him turn his head that way. So if his head is turning that way, he can only go that way, but because I'm trapping his arm, now he's stuck. If he tries to turn to his right side, he cannot move his head, and that's how I'm going to control my opponent from here. Over, under position. I can always control his belt too, of course, for added control. Sometimes, as I'm going to attack, I'm going to come to my knees, so I'm going to lose the head control, but I will be already in attacking mode. We're going to see later how to do it. And it's a north and south position, so his hips are very far away from my hips. Very hard for him to recover his guard, so just arm control, shoulder control. He cannot turn to either side because I'm controlling his head and his arm. Now with the double over, this is the weakest position from north and south because if he just extends his arms, he's already pushing me away, he's sliding out, I'm losing control. So first, anytime that I land into the double over, we're going to see later some situations, but anytime I land here, I can always quickly transition to over under. Right? It gives me better control, and I can start attacking the guy. With the gi, I can always control the belt here, right? I'm still dropping my hip on his face, choosing one side here, and controlling his belt, making it harder for him to extend his arm and disengage from this situation, right? If I'm turning his head that way, I know that he wants to turn that way, so I can always be a little heavier on this side here. He tries to go that way, I'm controlling his belt, and I'm securing the position. No gi is much harder. I don't have the belt here, so no gi, always try to transition to over-under. Or if he's already trying to escape by extending his arms, I'm gonna have to tripod up, putting weight, driving into the guy so he cannot create that distance. But still, it's hard when as he tries to escape. I tripod up, circle my arm, and we are here into the over-under position again. And with the double unders position here, it's actually a quite good control because basically I'm pinning both of his shoulders here, right? If he tries to turn to either side, his arms are getting stuck underneath my armpits here. Always heavy, turning his head to one side. So if his head is that way, I know he can only turn that way, so I can make myself a little heavy on this side here, right? If his head is turning that way, I don't want to be heavy on this side, otherwise I'm going to get rolled. So always have to the opposite side of his head. Okay? Stern. Under, double under, smash his head. I can always control the gi, of course, the belt. No gi, I just land my hands here, cupping on his hip, floating ribs area where I can hold the guy here. Okay? Just pay attention, anytime that you go to your knees, it is still quite a good control because his shoulders are pinned, but I'm not using much weight on top of the guy now. So a big, strong guy, he can just wrap my back there and he can bridge crazy and come and grow and come on top. Okay? It happens, so pay attention. Anytime you're in this position here, double under, make sure that if you're on your knees, and he starts trying to bridge and go crazy, just open your arms here, right, for a wider base. Or sprawl, smash his head, and you're in a much better position here. Let's take a look now at how to combine all those 5 types of side control in a flow drill. Okay, it's very useful if you can do this. As a warm-up, it's very important to know how to flow from position to position. And then later we see some different options there. So let's say I'm starting here with my classic chest on chest. The guy starts pushing on my hip with his forearm framing there, trying to recover his guard, right? So as he starts doing that, I'm going to check here the forearm and then transition into the Kazakatame. Check the side of my head, pick his elbow first. Since he's pushing on my hip, his elbow is off the mat. So I'm going to catch the elbow, and then I'm going to switch my legs into the Kazakatame. Avoid switching your hip first and then trying to pick his elbow, because now his elbow is already glued. It's going to be hard to pick his elbow up. He escapes and he's recovering his guard. So as he pushes on my hip, check the side of my head, trapping the forearm, pick the elbow up, kick my leg through, Kazakatame position. Okay? Now, I'm working here on the Kazakatame. Maybe I'm trying to attack. It's hard to attack. He has a nice defense. Let's transition into the mouse trap. Full pressure, transition, check the side of his head. I'm making a mistake, I'm trying to attack the guy, I lose control over his arm, he starts pushing on my neck. I'm losing control, he starts turning to his side. Let's transition into reverse Kazakatame, facing his hip. Hips low here, so I can capture his arm and sit on top of his bicep. My hand is already framing here on his leg, my arm over his shoulder, knee checking his hip. Landed in the reverse Kazakatame. Maybe the guy is starting to push me down with his right arm. I'm losing position. Lift my hip, pass over his arm, and I land here into the north and south position. Another common transition from the chest on chest. He starts framing my neck. My head was too high. He frames my neck, it's bothering my windpipe. I'm going to start looking away, throwing my arm. transitioning into the reverse Kazagatame. He pushes me down, north and south position. And I can also go from chest on chest to north and south. You're gonna see later during the north and south series, I'm gonna pick his shoulder, throw my elbow next to his neck, so he cannot follow me this way. And this arm, I'm gonna check his hip for the same purpose, so he cannot follow me as I go around. Check his hip, move around, I am into the north and south position. So many ways you can use this drill. If you practice well enough, you're going to be able to transition from position to position smoothly. So we have learned those 5 types of side control. Those are the best positions for me because I can control my opponent very well and I can attack from those positions. But sometimes as I'm passing the guard, we don't land so clean into one of those 5 positions. So we are gonna have to use the concepts, improvise a little bit to eventually land into one of those 5 clean positions. Let's create some examples here. For example, my opponent is in turtle position. I pass his guard, he turns into the turtle. Of course, if I can take his back, I'm going to take his back. Or I'm going to start pulling the guy down. Okay? And if he lands in a position like this, for example, like completely tight, there is no underhook for me, so it's hard for me to pin this shoulder down, right? So at least, if his arms are here, at least I can access his neck and start turning his head with my cross face, right? So I just pick his shoulder up a little bit, connect my bicep on his neck, and I'm gonna turn his head that way. So I'm already controlling the guy, making it harder for him to turn into me. I don't have the underhook right now, so because I'm on my knees, I don't have much weight on top of the guy. Sometimes this grip is not gonna be enough. He pushes on my chest and starts escaping. Not good enough. So not only the cross face here, but I also want to now put weight on top of the guy, right? I lift his shoulder, I can grab my fingers here on his armpit. Sometimes in the middle of his back is good too. Or, as we're going to do later, fingers on the armpit here, the middle finger on his armpit. Connect my bicep, turn his head away. And I'm gonna have my knees off the mat now, okay? Because again, if my knees are on the mat, I have no weight. Only the arm controlling the guy is gonna be hard since he's already pushing into me, he's framing here, right? Cross face the guy, lift my knees off the mat, and because my knees are off the mat, I have to block his hip with something here. So just like we learned from the concepts. Points of control and blocking the hip. I'm going to block his hip with my hand. Checking on the mat here, checking his hip. So I put weight on my cross face. He cannot turn into me, he cannot recover, and now I'm going to just take my time here. As he bridges, as he tries to extend, I'm going to start getting my underhook there. Right? He pushes again, maybe he's framing on my neck. Reverse Kazagatame. And we start little by little adjusting into one of those clean positions. Same stuff if I bring him down and he stays on his side instead. What are the concepts? I have to bring the guy flat. I'm going to control the bottom elbow here. If I pull this bottom elbow up, I'm going to bring the guy flat. Sometimes I'm going to use one arm, sometimes both arms. If the guy keeps leaning his stomach towards the ground, killing my angle, sometimes one arm is not enough. Both arms, control his elbow, pull the guy, and we are on the same position. Cross face, heavy here, he bridges, he gives me space, I get my underhook, he's pushing on my neck, reverse Kazagatame position. Now I bring the guy down, he turns all the way into me, already on his side. Right? Still tight, framed, hard to get my underhook on that guy. So what I'm gonna do, first of course keep my knee here by his hip so he doesn't recover his guard. I'm pushing this leg here so I'm heavy. I can keep my knee by his hip. My elbow here checking his hip behind his back. If he tries to hip escape, I can just follow the guy. I pinch the guy between my elbow and my knee here. And first option is trying to pick his elbow here and start lifting the elbow to turn the guy flat. And we are in the same position basically. Cross face, smash the guy. I can go into the reverse Kazgatame position. Sometimes the guy has a nice angle here hiding his elbow. It's hard to control his elbow and pull his elbow up, right? So make sure that you're pinching the guy here so he doesn't hip escape, creating space. What I can do here is, instead of cross facing, because it's hard to turn his head that way if he's already facing this way, right? It's more painful than anything here. So instead of cross facing the guy, I'm gonna just cup his shoulder here. I just cup his shoulder and I'm gonna drop my chest below his shoulder here. Cup the bottom shoulder, chest goes below the top shoulder so I can start flattening the guy here, right? It's important to cup this shoulder here because if my hand is out, for example, as I flat the guy, he just moves his shoulder here and I can never quite flat the guy out. So block the bottom shoulder, cup, drop my chest below, start smashing the top shoulder, right? Just like we learned during the concepts there, the points of control. Drop that shoulder down, I have my cross face, his arm is already crossed, I can go to reverse Kazgatame position here and start playing clean position. Another very common scenario is when I'm passing his guard here, trying to get chest on chest, he's already pushing me down and I'm buying his hip now. He's framing me here. I cannot climb up right now because he has strong frames. So first thing I should do is try to flat the guy out just like we learned. I'm by his hip. So if he starts turning to his side, I have to push this top hip bone down, right? With my body. So I'm gonna smash his top hip bone with my body, lifting my hip off the mat so I can put weight on top of the guy. My elbow is just checking here his hip. So if he tries to hip escape, my elbow blocks his hip. And I'm gonna ride here a little bit. Look my leg positioning here. Pretty much my elbow is aligned with my hip, same line, which aligns with his hip, and aligns also with my knee here. Right? I'm not too much that way where he can push me and sit up. I'm completely in a straight line here on top of his hip. Okay? This leg for base, pushing off this foot so I can lift my hip a little to smash his top hip. And I'm gonna ride here the guy and start deflecting his frames just like we did. As long as he's flat, I'm gonna be able to climb up to the torso. So he pushes, I deflect, and I climb 1 inch. He pushes again, I deflect again. I start climbing 1 inch, right? Now, since I'm kind of in between his hip and his shoulders, in the middle here, he might still try to turn to his side and be able to turn to his side a little. So what do? Cup his elbow, lift his elbow up, and I start flattening the guy again, right? If I can cross face right now, I have my classic chest on chest. At this point, he's already framing my neck. I turn away so he doesn't smash my wind point, and I get my reverse Kazgatame. Anytime that you are in one of those positions that are not super clean, just make sure you use the concepts, turn the guy flat first, and then you start deflecting his frames, climbing up inch by inch, controlling the guy, not letting him turn to his side, and eventually you're gonna land in one of those clean positions where we can start attacking. Alright guys, so now let's start the submission part of this course. Let's start with the chest on chest, side control, and using the gi, using the lapel. Okay, let's get the gi out of the way first, let's get those moves out of the way, and then we go for the moves where we don't rely on the gi grips. Let's say I'm passing his guard, I'm going for my knee slice position here, I'm gonna shoot my underhook, cross face the guy, and we're gonna land here in the classic chest on chest. Okay, several options from here. Great options with the gi. I can work with my gi or with his gi. Okay, let's start with my gi. So what I'm going to start doing is opening up my gi to pass around his neck. Okay, so first thing, I'm going to just unlock my hands here. I'm going to start picking his shoulder up so I can dig my arm deep here, and my fingers I reach on his armpit. Okay, especially the middle finger here right deep on his armpit. So now I can put a lot of shoulder pressure, turning his chin that way. Okay, that's gonna be my control. I still have my knee blocking his hip, of course. And I'm gonna start using now my free hand to open up my gi. I wanna open the lapel that's closer to his leg, so the far lapel here. Okay, I'm gonna open and catch the end of the lapel inside of my hand here. So I sometimes mid-row. It's easier because the gi is already kind of open. If the gi is very tight, I have to take my time here, or I go for a different technique, no problem. So let's start with this one here. I have my regular chest on chest again. I'm going to start lifting his shoulder up so I can dig my fingers really deep under his armpit. Okay, so now one arm holding the guy, putting shoulder pressure here. I lean forward on my toes, putting pressure on his face. And now I'm going to free this hand and start working on my lapel, the far lapel here. I open my gi, make sure it's really, really loose. And I'm going to hide the end of the gi here inside of my hand. And I'm going to start now throwing over his shoulder. If he's framing me here, I just make sure that I'm able to smash his hand against his shoulder, right? Again, if he's pushing me all the way up, I'm starting to lose the position. He's going to start turning to his side. I will have to recover side control, of course. But from the beginning, if his hand was on the outside, once I start working on my control on the lapel here, if he tries to frame me now, I just make sure I'm really low, smashing his hand here. Don't let the guy push me all the way up. Right? I'm going to pass the lapel over his shoulder. I'm going to feed to my other hand. And now I'm going to take my time and check his hip here again with my elbow so he doesn't hip escape. And I make sure that this lapel connects to his neck. Okay? You guys are going to see sometimes that if his arm is really tight here, my hand is not going to fit underneath this little hole here. So that's when I'm going to just leave the tip of the gi, the tip of the lapel out. And I'm going to start feeding here. Okay? Now I can grab with my other hand, or sometimes even with my mouth here. Push, get it free, and now pull all the way where I can feed to my other hand. Okay? It doesn't need to be super tight all the way here. It's actually better to be at the end of the lapel here, so it makes it easier for me to extend my arm later. You guys are going to see how. Okay? Controlling the guy. Now I'm going to start going to north and south position. I let go here. I'm going to start blocking his hip so he doesn't follow me. Okay? I'm going to start going to north and south. Make sure that my head is low, so if he's pushing my head up here, I don't want to walk around and his head is going to slip out. So if he's pushing me up, make sure that my head goes to his chest. I clear his arm, my head goes to his chest. And now I'm going to start walking very low here, moving my shoulder from his face all the way to his belly button. Right? I want to extend my arm. So as I walk around, I extend, and I'm going to check his head with my knee here. This hand that I'm blocking his hip prevents the guy from following me this way. And once I check his head, it also prevents from the guy moving around. So I was here, I passed, I check his hip, very low now, extend my arm, bring my shoulder towards his belly button, check his head, Now I'm going to start choking the guy with this lapel here. The more I walk this way, the more the lapel goes around his neck. That's the idea, right? But I want to make sure that I extend my arm here with my shoulder touching his belly button pretty much. Otherwise it becomes a neck crank. If I do this, it's a neck crank. He might not tap. So I extend my shoulder and I'm on my toes checking his head in order to choke the guy out. Right? I just extend the arm here, controlling his lapel. Let's take a look here again. Chest on chest position, lift his shoulder, catch his armpit with my fingers. Now I'm going to put a lot of shoulder pressure. That's what's keeping the guy down here as I work my hand to open my lapel. Open my lapel, hide the end of the tip of the gi here under my hand so he cannot see what's happening. I'm going to punch it through, feed to my hand. Block his hip. I'm going to start walking now towards north and south. Don't let the guy push my head. I cannot lift my head up and allow him to free his head. So if he's pushing my neck already, clear the arm. Keep my head low as I walk around, moving my shoulder towards his belly button, extending my arm and checking his head with my knee. Also, pay attention to the final position of my head. I want right next to his hip, blocking it so he cannot follow me to the north and south position.
That's how it works. We haven't been close.
Yeah, I really don't know when.
I think they I'm not sure. Are they
I'm Stephen because he's like him and my sister. Yeah, don't worry. Thank you.
Now let's take a look at how to attack from the classic chest on chest, using my opponent's lapel now instead of my own gi. We are here again with my chest on chest side control. I'm gonna start doing exactly the same, lifting his shoulder, digging my hand deep, my bicep connect to his neck, so I can use my fingers here right on his armpit. I lift his arm a little bit with my elbow, my finger right there on his armpit, putting a lot of shoulder pressure now, controlling the guy. And now sometimes I'm having a hard time opening my gi, or I see that his gi is already opened. So I'm going to start opening his lapel and I'm going to start passing underneath his arm. Okay? Even if he's framing here or trying to push me away, I can still open and pass really tight here to my hand. Okay? Make sure I open the gi all the way. And now with this grip here, I'm going to pop to knee on stomach. We have several attacks from knee on stomach. Okay? I'm going to slide this hand free here to his hip to block his hip so he doesn't hip escape as I pop to my knee on stomach, right? Press my knuckles down on the mat with my other hand as well, and I'm going to pop to my knee on stomach, okay? Remember, if the guy wants to turn into me, he has to lift this shoulder and he has to lift this hip. So my knee is controlling the far hip bone, as the lapel now works basically as my underhook, right? I'm controlling his shoulder there with this lapel control. That's the advantage of working on this control here. Now, with this grip, several attacks from here. Let's start with the baseball bat choke. All I'm going to do is, see that my hand's a little closer to his shoulder, it's way too deep. I'm going to release a little, going with my hand next to his neck, behind his neck, right? I don't want my hand way too deep on his shoulder. I slide my hand down towards his lapel. And now, two options. I can control his collar here, palm up, or I can control the same lapel that I just passed, okay? As I keep my knee on belly control here, right? Anytime that the guy tries to defend my hands, bring both of his hands to control my arm here, I can always transition to the mount if I want to, right? So I have my leg posted there, drive into the guy, controlling this hip bone. I'm going to start working my hand here, either on his lapel, or I'm going to throw my hand, connect to his shoulder here, to his neck. I'm going to feed the same lapel that was controlling. Okay? 2 ways now to finish this. One is more like a trachea choke, and the other one is more like a blood choke. Okay? The trachea choke, I'm going to bring my forearm here against his neck. Okay? Once I touch on his neck and pass the other lapel, I make sure that my elbow is down on his chest, so he doesn't bring his arm under my arm, right? If he connects to his neck now, under my arm, he connects to his neck, it's hard now to strangle the guy, right? His hand gets on the way, it blocks my choke. So I make sure once I catch here, my elbow is tight against his chest so he cannot bring his arm under, okay? If I want to go more to the trachea choke, which is the quickest one, I'm going to just bring my elbows together. Elbows together. And I'm going to do a knee slide right here over his arm, over his shoulder. Okay? Here. And now the thing is, keeping my head as low as I can, I'm going to try to bring my knee checking his head again. Okay? Because if I don't check that head, he's going to keep spinning around. And I can never choke the guy here. Right? Similar to the one where I'm controlling my own gi here. So from this position, check his neck, hand connects to his neck, control the same lapel, bring my elbows together as I drop my shoulder and my head next to his chest. This knee slides right there. Check his head, move my head all the way to the other side where I came from. And this is the motion, right? This goes against his trachea, and this I pull up, right? Extending my arm so it cuts the other side of his neck. One more in front of his trachea, and the other cuts this side of his neck here. One more time. I have my regular chest on chest. I'm going to start lifting his shoulder, digging my fingers under his armpit, putting a lot of shoulder pressure now. As I have time now to work on his lapel. Open, pass to my hand, make sure I pull the lapel all the way up, okay? I can pull his arm down and pull the lapel up here in opposite directions to make sure it's really, really tight. As I come up to my knees, I'm gonna block his hip here so he doesn't hip escape. Pop to knee on stomach, right? This hand here controlling his head prevents him from turning into me as well because it's almost like a crossface. Heavy on the far hip, I'm riding here. And I'm going to slide my hand a little more behind his neck so it gives space for this hand here, right? If the hand is too deep, I cannot catch the lapel. Slide the hand towards his neck, behind his neck, connect and feed to my other hand. Elbows together, head low, shoulder low as I knee slide. Check his head. Head goes all the way there towards the hip, towards the ground. So this knee prevents him from going around, and my head here too. If he tries to spin around, his hip is blocked and his head is blocked as I work the choke. A lot of times when I'm on this position here, the guy's going to be using his hands to defend, right? So usually he's going to be using this left hand trying to comb his hair so he prevents my choke. So that's why I keep my elbow down. But he could be also using his right hand to block my elbow here. So he prevents now my elbows from connecting together. Okay, it's a nice defense. I'm gonna have to use my knee to clear the arm. So I'm gonna use my knee here, pop his arm down. Okay, as I come with my other knee and check his arm as well. Now, because I'm a little more further towards his head and not closer to his hip anymore, right? I was here first, now I'm here. My arm's a little more extended, okay? I'm a little out of angle to try to go for the regular trachea choke baseball bat. So what I'm gonna do is the blood choke variation. I'm gonna bring my knee here next to his shoulder, and I'm gonna cross my arms. I'm not really diving this arm against his neck. I'm really crossing, right? So my arms are a little more extended. My elbow doesn't touch his chest as much, cutting his air supply. I extend, check his head, and my head goes all the way to the other side, same way. And I pull my arms up towards my chest. Now it's really like a cross choke, same as a cross choke from the mouth. This one is just on the north and south position, right? Now they are parallel. As I go around, they cross. Really on the sides of his neck, not on the windpipe anymore, right? Let's take a look here. Regular chest on chest, lift, dig my finger under. I'm going to start working here, opening his lapel. Pass all the way, control. Right now I want to control next to his shoulder to have a nice pressure against his neck, very tight. Slide to the hip. Pop to my knee on stomach, blocking his hip, blocking his head, checking the hip so he doesn't turn into me. When he starts sliding, my hand now behind his neck. Feet, and I have my regular baseball bat, air choke. If he blocks it with his right hand, he blocks my elbow, and I cannot connect my elbows together. I clear the arm, step over, and I go for my blood choke with my arms a little more extended. Now let's work a combo for that baseball bat choke. Okay, so we're still here on the classic chest on chest, going to knee on stomach. And now I'm still setting up my baseball bat. Slide the hand from the shoulder to the neck. And as I'm trying to reach his neck, he keeps blocking my hand. There's no way I'm gonna access that. Sometimes he just keeps his hand next to his neck, and it's hard now. I won't be able to chop his neck if his hand is there. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just switch hands. My right hand is gonna control the other lapel now, going to a cross choke. I'm gonna shoot my hand as deep as I can, dropping my shoulder here next to his chest to get deep. I really want next to his neck, almost behind his neck, right? If I just feed like this, it's gonna be too loose. So I'm gonna feed to this hand, dropping my shoulder to the ground, almost like my elbow by his neck. So my arm bends like this. I can reach behind his neck. Okay, now it's tight. I just switched my grip, and I have my cross choke here, right? We are gonna see later what to do if he starts blocking my cross choke, but I can take my time here, right? Control any part, any material here. I can control the gi here, or even the same lapel that I was controlling on this hand here, right? Anywhere, just make sure you connect to his neck and you grab any piece of material here. Now, the way I'm gonna finish, I don't wanna drop my head towards the ground, otherwise he pushes my hip and I'm gonna fall. I'm off balance. So all I'm gonna do is pull the guy up instead, right? Connect to his neck, grab the material, and I'm gonna pull the guy up, crossing my arms, right? Pull the guy up, bringing my elbows towards my hip, right? Same way as we finish from the mount or from close guard, right? I can even, as I start choking, if the guy keeps opening my hands and trying to open my elbows, work on my hands, I can even go to the mount and finish from the mount here. Okay? Very powerful choke because of this lapel around his back. So one more time here, chest on chest. I'm gonna lift his shoulder, dig my hand, shoulder pressure, start opening the gi and fit into my hand. Nice. Pull the shoulder down, pull the lapel up, I'm here tight. Knee on stomach. Baseball bat is always the first option because I don't have to switch hands, right? So if I can go to baseball bat, great. If it blocks my hand, I can always switch here. And the shoulder close to his body, bending my elbow here, which allows me to get my hand really deep behind his neck. And now it's just a matter of time for me to reach the shoulder. He might be blocking my hand, and I'm gonna be working here. If I cannot control his gi, we're gonna see later what to do, but right now I was able to, right? Any piece of the gi here, if I can control the same lapel that's around his back, even better, right? Stronger. Pull the guy up, bring my elbows towards my hip, getting the choke. Don't drop your head down, otherwise you're gonna be off balance. Alright guys, so now let's take a look on how to beat his defenses when I'm going to the cross choke, okay? So beginning all the same, you guys already know how to do. First option, always baseball bat, he's blocking. I go cross choke, he blocks, now the hand is cross choking, okay? Now all I'm gonna do is drag his arm. Now let's go for the bravo choke. If I cannot complete the cross choke here, I'm gonna cup his tricep here. I'm gonna pull his arm across, drop my chest behind his arm, so I'm trapping his arm, and now I'm gonna bring my knee towards the ground. My knee is by his hip, checking his hip, posting my other leg just like a knee on stomach, and my weight is behind his tricep. Okay? Now, I'm going to control his sleeve here. I can control here 4 fingers on the inside, or sometimes even a C grip here, a little above his elbow. Now I'm going to start guiding his arm against his neck. I want his shoulder connected to his neck and the bicep, right? If his arm is too low, his shoulder is not touching his neck. If the arm is too high, he's choking his face, which is not good, right? I want to choke his neck. So a nice grip here on his lapel. I just cross his arm, chest on top of the tricep, and I pull this arm up. I pull up towards the ceiling, lifting my elbow up as I keep pushing his arm down with my chest and with my arm control, which could be above his elbow or on the sleeve. Right? Guide his arm to his neck, pull the choking arm up, and I have the choke right there. Just make sure the hand on the lapel is super deep as it should be since the beginning, right? So I was here on knee on stomach, passing the lapel to my hand. Baseball bat he blocks, I cross already deep here behind his neck. So the cross choke is there. If he blocks the cross choke, control the tricep. Pull across, chest behind it, knee to the ground, and I have this leg posted so I can drive into the guy. Now it's just a matter of connecting his shoulder and his bicep to his neck. I just have to find the angle here. Right? Shoulder and bicep on his neck, pull the grip up, drop weight on top of that tricep. Okay? Important to note that when I drag my opponent's arm and drop my knee to the ground, I keep my opponent on his side and my knee should be by his hip, preventing him recovering his guard. I want my knee on the ground, otherwise if I keep a knee on stomach I would be off balanced. Also, the angle of my knee on the ground allows me to drive and guide his arm and bicep against his neck, using my chest and body weight. Another way to work this Bravo choke is when I'm going to knee on stomach, even before I get into the baseball bat, he's already pushing my knee down and turning to his side. Okay, so all I'm going to do is loop my arm under his arm, making sure that my shoulder is low by his armpit, so this hand here is really deep where I can feed. And we are in the position already. Just guide his arm against his neck, pull my grip up, chest behind the tricep to go for the choke. Now let's take a look at a variation of the Bravo choke when I cannot cross his arm, okay? It keeps his arm tight, I cannot bring it down. I call this the Tagarella Bravo choke, which I learned from the great Jonathan Tagarella. So I'm here on the same position already, knee on stomach. I'm going for my baseball bat, he blocks my hand. I cannot go through, so I'm going to start shooting under crossing my grip to go for the cross choke. He blocks the cross choke. When I'm trying to cross his arm, he makes this arm stiff, strong, it's hard to cross, right? Of course, now I can always try to go back to the cross choke here, right? Because he's not covering his neck. Sometimes the guy's a little smarter. He covers the neck with the hand, or sometimes he just shrugs his shoulder here, and I cannot go for the cross choke, and I cannot cross his arm. So I get a little stuck in this position. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually roll. Right? The arm that I'm trying to bring down this way, I just open a little, his elbow towards his face a little bit to give me space for me to shoot my shoulder all the way around his arm. I want to do almost like a forward roll, touching my shoulder on the mat. Right? So I cannot bring the guy, his arm down here. I'm going to roll and land on this position. Push his arm against his neck. Pull the lapel against his neck, of course, and I have the choke here. Sometimes to make it tighter and not let the guy move around too much, I can always strap his leg, okay? Sometimes the bottom, either leg, sometimes the top leg, right? Because if he starts moving, if he frees this arm here, he might try to escape. With this control here, if I push his arm against his neck, it's hard for him to turn into me, he's gonna choke himself. And if he turns away, he's going against the lapel choke here, right? So he's stuck, but if he moves his legs and maybe he frees his arm, he might escape. So I just throw my leg on top, trap one of his legs, pull the lapel, drive his arm against his neck, and I have the choke here. So another option that we have when we are passing the lapel under the armpit is actually trapping his arm into an arm sling position. Okay, that's very common when the guy is trying to block the lapel by driving his elbow hard against the mat, right? So I cannot slide under. So here, to start from the same position, I have my regular classic side control here, and the guy is framing on my neck, which is fine if I can keep his hand close to his shoulder, right? Smashing his hand against his shoulder. Anytime he starts pushing way too much, then we're gonna see later what to do. Probably I'm gonna go to reverse Kasugatame position. But right now my head is low, I'm smashing his arm, right? And I'm gonna do all the same. I'm gonna lift his shoulder, catch his armpit, and start passing the lapel. Once I start passing the lapel, he drops his elbow down, making it harder for me to pass under, right? And then the lapel gets stuck here. So I'm gonna do, make sure I go all the way towards the end of the lapel here, with my hand, the tip of the lapel. And I'm gonna trap his arm, right? He's blocking here the lapel. I shoot the lapel over his arm, okay? Make sure that my arm also, my tricep here, my elbow, covers his arm, so I'm really trapping his arm now, instead of just doing like this, right, with the lapel. My arm is below, maybe he can free his arm. If I shoot my arm over his arm, now I have the time to feed to my other hand. And look what happens, his arm is completely trapped, right? Good position now for me to start going to knee on stomach, okay? And we can start attacking again with the same baseball bat choke or the cross choke, right? If he's blocking my baseball bat with his right hand here, I can always go to the cross choke and attack from here, right? We don't have the Bravo choke, of course, because his arm is strapped, but it's a very devastating position here with one arm out of the party here. I'm gonna get something even. If I see that I cannot reach the lapel, or sometimes the lapel is too short and I cannot have a nice grip here, I can always slide to the mount. Since his arm is trapped there, it's very hard for him to block my mouth, right? But I should be able to finish cross choke or that baseball bat here with no problems, right? Slide my knee, connect my elbows together. I have my choke there. Now let's take a look at how to deal with the underhook, right? Once I opening his lapel, he might try to throw his underhook and escape. So we have to know how to deal with that. So let's take a look here. Let's say we have here, again, the classic side control. Doesn't matter if he's framing my neck or not, or his arm is on the outside. I'm going to start lifting his shoulder, digging my bicep against his neck, catching his armpit here. And as I start opening his lapel, there is always a space for him to shoot the underhook. Right? Of course, if I have a nice shoulder pressure there, he won't be able to turn into me, right? He wants to shoot his underhook, because if he starts bridging and punching his underhook into me, he might start turning to his side. If my head control is good, he won't be able to do that, but sometimes he slips out, or the guy is very explosive. As I'm working the lapel here, his bridge is good, and my head control starts slipping out, and he starts turning to his side, losing control here, right? So if I see that happening, first thing, we have different stages, early stages and late stages, but if he starts punching, engaging his underhook, and I see that I'm losing this control over his head, first thing I'm gonna smash this underhook here, right? I'm gonna be here next to his hip, smashing his wrist here, right, around his hip. Because if I stay on the same position, I'm too high on his arm, he's gonna start punching me up. So as that starts happening, I switch here, smashing his wrist against his hip. And we are on this position like we learned in the beginning of the series there, right? I'm right on his hip, controlling the far hip here, So he cannot turn into me, my legs extended, aligned with my elbow and with my foot. And also I want to frame his neck now. Right? Because if he keeps punching this underhook and bridging, maybe he can still throw me up here. So by framing the neck, I cannot go up because I'm attached, anchored into the guy here. He bridges, I'm here, I'm not gonna go anywhere. Right? So that's how I'm gonna stop his underhook, early defense, and from here, two things could happen. A lot of times, he's gonna see that he's not gonna go anywhere, so he's gonna free his underhook. And then I'm gonna start climbing up, right? Maybe he pushes me, I'm gonna start deflecting his frames here, until I establish my side control again. Sometimes the guy doesn't want to free his arm there. He stays there. It's okay. I'm gonna bring my elbow on the inside here. Once he stops bucking a little bit, I bring my elbow on the inside and drop it down. Now I'm getting my underhook here. I just regain my underhook, get underneath his arm, and I can start climbing up again. Another situation now is when the guy starts turning to his side a little bit more now. I'm a little later for that. We are starting here again, all the same. I have my side control, dig. I'm going to start opening his lapel. He shoots his underhook. And he starts turning to his side. I cannot smash his hip anymore because he's already on his side. I lost control and he's going to start recovering here. Right? So if that's the case, I'm losing control. He's punching his underhook. I'm going to shoot my overhook. So at least he doesn't go to my back here. Right? I shoot my overhook and I'm going to frame on his neck. Heavy now. All my weight on his head here. If he tries to keep coming to his knees, I just stay heavy here. I'm going to start walking around now. This hand here, that's my overhook. I just catch behind his neck. I can feed here. I bend his neck and catch with this hand. As I'm going to walk all the way around now. On my feet, knees off the mat. I'm going to land into this position, bringing the guy down. Ready to work on my classic chest on chest. Let's take a look at that again. So we are here again. I'm working, controlling his armpit here. As I start opening his lapel, he shoots his underhook, and I'm losing control now. He starts turning to his side. Immediately, figure four, my arms here, overhook, and I smash his head down. Right? And now I have weight on his head and my chest on top of his shoulder here. Knees off the mat. Now I'm putting all my weight here. I'm going to start walking around. Bend his neck with this hand, shoot this arm deeper. The back of my hand goes behind his neck. I'm going to walk all the way around, bringing the guy down now with this elbow here. Right? And I'm here again into my classic side control. And the last option is, if you are late, you are slow, we're going to work on the front headlock position here. So I'm here, all the same. I'm trying to pick his lapel, he shoots the underhook. Now he moves me so far towards his head that even my overhook here is not going to be enough to stop the guy. He's already turning to his knees. As he goes to his knees, I just front headlock the guy here, right? Over the shoulder, under his armpit. Just make sure if he tries to shoot from my legs here, I'm going to sprawl on top of the guy. And from here, there's several options. I can start crossing his arm here, working my anacondas, going around and work my darts chokes here. Or I can just spin around now and go to his back since he's under control, right? Just pay attention on this arm here. If I just walk around, he can grab my leg and I get stuck here. Before I go around, just make sure that I kill the arm. I just punch his elbow in, right? Pass and walk around, ready to take his back now. Now let's start talking about some techniques where we don't rely on the gi grips. Okay, I'm gonna still cover some options specifically for the gi if necessary, but now it's more general. So we're starting here, chest on chest, beginning all the same. I'm gonna pick his shoulder up, connect my bicep on his neck, dig my fingers on his armpit. And now, since I don't have the lapel, I can always try to attack this arm here. All I'm gonna do is cup on his bicep and bring my forearm in front of his stomach. Okay, my forearm completely flat on his stomach. So basically what I'm doing here is twisting the guy. I drive his head that way with my shoulder and I bring his arm towards me. Right? The guy cannot turn either way now because he's completely twisted and trapped. Now what I'm going to do with this control, which also my forearm prevents the guy turning into me, because I'm going to let go of this hand here controlling his armpit. I'm going to throw to the other side. If he tries to turn into me now, my forearm smashes his belly here, preventing his turn. Okay? And now I'm going to drive my head next to his hip so I can pivot on his hip here with my head as I tripod up, using this hand here for balance. I'm going to start tripoding up. And I'm going to bring my knee now underneath his arm, sitting into this armbar position. Bring my heel super glued here against his neck. And I'm going to catch my other hand here on the wrist and go for my armbar. Make sure my knees are pinching together. My heel is strapping his leg, almost trying to bring my heel close to my butt here, trapping the guy. My hip as close to his shoulder as possible, and I have my armbar here. Okay? Because I don't have my leg over his stomach, he can always try to go to the hitchhike escape if he turns his thumb down, twisting his shoulder. Okay? So how do I prevent that? Let's go back there. Once I land into this position, if I see the guy turning this way, I'm going to turn his hand to the opposite direction. Okay? If he keeps turning that way, he's going to blow his shoulder. Right? He cannot do that. And since I'm turning his thumb that way, I'm not going to crank down here. I'm going to crank into the opposite direction of his thumb. His thumb points that way. I crank his elbow against the side of my thigh here. Crank it this way. Okay? In case I'm applying the armbar and he's already turning, I'm going to transition into the omoplata position here. And for the gi, I can do exactly the same, but I can control his pants. So I'm going to dig here, control his arm using my forearm against his stomach. I'm going to start pivoting, tripoding up to prevent him hitchhiking escape. I'm going to control his pants now at the knee. Here. So if he tries to hitchhike, he cannot go. And I can armbar the guy with one arm only, or now control both arms and finish right here. Alright, now let's take a look at some knee on stomach controls for no gi, okay? With the gi, when we have the lapel under the armpit, it's a pretty solid control, right? I'm controlling his shoulder, harder for him to turn into me. No gi, I don't have that luxury there, so let's take a look at some points of control there, okay? And then from the knee on stomach, we can also attack the guy. So of course, I can get into knee on stomach from the side control, as you're gonna see, or when I'm passing through, right? Let's say I'm passing here with my X pass, turn his legs, and I'm already into knee on stomach, okay? But if we're gonna do from side control, we are here in this position. All I'm gonna do is slide the hand here, that's my underhook, block his hip, okay? The other hand I'm gonna post on the mat, I'm gonna pop to my knees, okay? Pop to my knee here, knee on stomach. The hand here next to his neck works as a crossface. If he tries to turn into me, his head into me, I'm blocking the head. It's not the strongest in the world, but it's enough to keep the guy here. I have my hand here on the mat heavy to prevent his hip escape. He tries to hip escape. My hand is there blocking. And my knee and stomach here is actually shin across the belly, right? So I want my shin completely across his belly, controlling this far hip here. I know he wants to turn into me, so I'm heavy into that far hip. And my foot is off the mat to keep all my weight on top of the guy here, okay? Of course, the knee and stomach is a dynamic position. If he starts turning into me too much, my foot automatically goes to the ground, so I can base here and stay solid. I can push off my foot again against and drive my knee against that hip bone again and bring the guy back, right? So cross face to not let the guy turn into me, hand on the ground blocking his hip, knee checking the far hip. If it tries to turn that way, I can always just slide my shin controlling the near hip here, right? So right now I'm heavy on the far hip. If it tries to turn away, I slide my shin down controlling the near hip. And I'm gonna keep playing like this, maintaining the control. If it tries to push me up on my chest, I can always control his neck here, right? To stay attached, anchored to the guy. Sometimes even the leg and the neck here, so I can stay solid into the position. And from here we're gonna start attacking. By the way, this leg here is also important. I'm always pushing off this foot here on the neck to put weight on top of the guy, right? Look, my knee, my hip is opened, right? I'm not facing that way with this knee down, kind of running 100 meters here, right? I'm facing the guy, the knee on belly position is very useful for self-defense too. So my base here is the same as if I want to punch the guy here. I cannot punch the guy if I'm facing that way, right? I'm facing the guy here, my hip is open, and that's how I control the guy. Basic attack. I can start just bothering his neck here, right? Chip choke, I'm going to control his shoulder, start dropping my forearm against his track here, dropping my elbow down. He has to address this, right? He has to use his hands to defend my choke. If his hands are busy, there is nothing stopping my mount. So the transition to the mount here is pretty simple. Also very common, if he starts turning into me, I'm starting to lose control, I can always jump around into this modified mount position. So usually I'm going to go to knee and stomach when my arm attacks are not working, or I'm trying to go to the mount, he keeps blocking my mount, I'm having a hard time to attack the guy here. So going to knee and stomach, it's always a good option to open the guy up, and I can transition to submissions or to the mount. Let's take a look now at some attacks where we don't rely on the gi from knee on stomach. Okay, so we are here starting again. Our basic chest on chest. I'm gonna go for the knee on stomach just like we did. Block his hip, block his head, pop to my knees. It's very common that the guy's gonna start trying to push my knee and drive to the ground, right? If he does that, he always leaves a little space here if he pushes my knee with his hand. So I'm going to capitalize on this space here, bringing my hand on his tricep and pulling my forearm against his chest, just like we did, right? We can go to the spinning arm bar here from the knee and stomach. Put weight and I spin around. Spinning arm bar just like we learned. Second option, and it's a little more unexpected, is hugging his arm here, and instead of spinning around, I'm going to stay on the side here where I am. So I just cup, I'm going to bring my arm here, instead of on his stomach where I go low and tripod, I'm going to bring on top of my leg here. Right? My elbow on top of my hip, on top of my thigh. And then I'm going to use this hand here for balance on the other side. As I'm going to step my leg over his head. I'm going to bring this knee here next to his neck. from this position. Pinch my knees together to trap his arm. His arm is over my shoulder, just want to punch over my neck instead. And I have my reverse arm bar here, right? Knees pinching together, controlling his arm. Slide my elbow on top of his elbow here. Several ways you can do. You can control hand to hand. I like to control my hand over my tricep here, so I push it down against my chest. There is this little gap here, that's where I'm going to break his elbow. If I'm flat on my back, his elbow is already touching my chest here, nothing's going to happen. I want to be sitting up to maintain the gap as I crank his elbow against my chest. My neck slides all the way towards his wrist there, right? That's the end of the lever there. Bring it down, his elbow against my chest, sit up, my shoulder against his wrist for the break. Pinching my knees together, maintaining his arm here. In case he comes to his knees, I free my leg and I go again to the omoplata there. Now still working on that knee on stomach, let's try to attack now the near arm, okay? So all the same situation here, I'm gonna pop to my knee on stomach, and instead of pushing my knee, the guy is gonna be pushing my hip with the near arm here, right? Very common mistake from beginners, right? He might be pushing my chest too, trying to just push me away and release the pressure of my knee on stomach. So let's attack this arm here. Right, what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna just block. If he's really pushing on my hip bone here, just lift, block his arm. I'm gonna pinch now his wrist under my armpit here. I bring my elbow, smashing his arm against my ribs. Okay, so his arm is trapped. And now what I'm gonna do is move my foot really under his armpit here. My locking is staying tight. Alright, so very simple armbar, but you have to be careful because anytime that you have an armbar with his wrist under my arm, it's very powerful, very dangerous. Okay, so once I bring my foot here, I put weight on his chest to keep the guy down, and I'm gonna pass my other leg over. Sometimes I can finish here already. If I just pop my hip, right? If I pop my hip against my hand that's controlling his elbow, I have the submission here, right? I just block his head, of course. But it's very dangerous if I fall back on my back. I have to be very careful with this, right? If I go all the way, I can break his arm very easily, right? A super strong leverage here, you can break his elbow. So either for safety, either try to finish from the mount. I block his arm, pinch. I just find my armpit here next to his wrist, right? My hand here is on the tricep, but close to the elbow. Slide my foot here and put weight, right? Slide my foot here, hooking on his shoulder. Put weight, sit on the guy. And I'm gonna pass my leg. If I can finish here, great. If I wanna go down, just go slow. And the best thing to do is go down and start letting go. My armpit passes his hand so I can catch his hand with my other arm. Now it's much safer here, right? Just make sure that my hip is glued to his shoulder as much as I can. Pinching my knees together. I have my arm right here. In case he goes to the hitchhike, we know what to do, right? If he tries to go, I bring his thumb towards his legs. Or I can go, if he goes there, I go to the omoplata again. Alright, so now let's start the Kasugatame series, okay? Usually I'm going to go to the Kasugatame position when the guy is bothering my hip with his elbow, trying to recover his guard, so I can do a quick transition there, Okay. So I have my classic chest on chest here. The guy starts using his elbow here on my hip. He might start bridging there, trying to get his legs underneath my body, right? So make sure my knees checking his hip good. But if I see them starting to lose this chest on chest here, I want to deal with the elbow that's pushing on my hip, right? So that's when I'm going to start transitioning to the Kesgettan position. First, I'm going to check his arm there. I'm going to control the side of my head here to trap his arm and don't let the guy frame my neck, right? Check the side of my head. I'm going to control now the elbow that's pushing my hip before I switch my hip, right? Because if I switch my hip without controlling his elbow, if he now bring his elbow heavy against the mat, it's going to be very hard to pull this elbow up. Now he hip escapes, now he starts escaping. So, check here my head to trap the forearm. And I'm going to control the elbow first. Control, he's pushing on my hip anyways, his elbow is off the mat. Control. And now with my hip very low against the mat, I'm going to start transitioning to the Kesgettan position. And as we learned before, I want my elbow off the mat 1 inch and my hip off the mat 1 inch too, so all my weight is on top of the guy here. Very uncomfortable, okay? I can wear the guy out here, right? Just with my body weight. As we saw too, my toes here facing down towards the angle of his bridge here, right? He wants to bridge that way, so my foot is posted to prevent his bridge. And my foot here, knee up, leg base wide, because if he tries to sit up, this foot there is preventing the sit-ups leg. I'm heavy here and solid wide base. Now the more time I spend here, lifting his arms up, right? I pull his arm up here, elbow pinching against his wrist. My hand checking my head also lifts his arm, so both arms I'm pulling up, not spending too much energy, but just lifting his arms and sinking my weight into the guy, right? Hip off the mat. The more time passes here, the more uncomfortable he is. He's going to start using his arms to escape. Right? He wants to circle his arm, push on my neck, and start getting away. But because I'm controlling this side of my head, he cannot really frame my neck. He's actually giving the Americana there. So I just time it. The more he tries to push there, the more his arm is stuck. I'm going to let go here his elbow and catch the wrist. Right? Really quick. Sometimes I can even use, instead of my hand, I can use my forearm. Right? It's a bigger area here to catch his wrist. Right? I just curve here my hand. So his hand is on the outside here. I'm putting pressure on him and taking my time. He starts to get desperate. He circles. I catch. And I'm going to control my hand, regular American. I'm going to go now chest on chest to finish this. Right? How do I finish? Bring my elbow or his elbow close to his body. And now I keep his hand down, right? Close to the mat. If I can touch his hand on the mat, he's already tapping pretty much, right? If he's more flexible, glue his hand on the mat and lift my elbow, right? That's the finish, right? I want to bring his elbow down towards his body to limit his range of motion. If his elbow is here, he can move his arm way more, right? His shoulder is much more flexible that way than here. So once I catch the Americana here, he circles, I catch, bring his elbow down towards his body. My other elbow is next to his head. Now I'm going to pin his hand down and start lifting his elbow. A paintbrush motion. Always also turn his wrist that way. Right? The more his thumb is facing this way, the more flexible he is. The more his thumb is facing that way, the less flexible. He's already tapping, just lifting, he's already tapping. Okay? So if I can work on this, the motorcycle grip here, even better. It's a very short movement. Devastating submission, super simple, but I'm just using my body weight to wear the guy down, to make him tired. And he's going to start panicking and doing stupid stuff. Once he circles in front of my neck, I catch and go for the Americana. Now let's start working the arm bars from the Kazakh position, okay? Elbow off the mat, hip off the mat, putting a lot of pressure on top of the guy here. Just like we saw during the flow drill, sometimes I can add even more pressure. If I see that I'm not bothering the guy enough here, he feels like comfortable, I'm going to start putting more pressure. I'm going to start driving, walking towards the guy. Walk, 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 pulling his arms up and digging my ribs against his ribs. Okay, putting a lot of pressure here. Now, of course, we already know if it circles his left arm, I'm going to catch the American under. But I can also attack either this arm or this one. Let's start with this one here. Now, in order to attack, it's going to be an arm bar here. I want to pass my leg over his head. So if my chest is too close to his armpit, I cannot even pass my leg over his head. Right? I cannot trap his head. For this to work, I have to be a little lower on his stomach, right? So now I have the angle to pass my leg over his head, trapping his head so I can apply the arm bar here. Look my grip. I'm gonna control here tricep above the elbow, of course. And as I pass my leg over his head, we already learned this, my armpit meets his wrist, right? I wanna have wrist control and elbow control. Very important now. If the guy is trying to pull his elbow down towards the mat, it's not the time to go for this one, because once I try to pass my leg, my hip is blocked by his arm, right? He keeps pulling down, so his elbow blocks my hip. I cannot pass my leg. I'm gonna go for this arm bar once he relaxes this arm here. So if the arm is relaxed, I can pass my leg over, and his elbow won't be able to block my hip. Now the finish is super simple. I'm already in position. Slide my armpit towards his wrist, elbow in place under his arm. I just pop my hip against my hand, which goes against his elbow. And then I have the arm bar there, right? Again, from this position, I just have to feel when his arm is relaxed, right? Meanwhile, I'm still taking care of the Americana here, putting weight on the guy. And once the arm relaxes, I control the head. Slide my armpit towards his wrist if necessary. Now I pop my hip against my hand for the finish. And why I'm trapping his head? Because if I just try to finish here, he can just sit up, right? He sits up, I lose the position, right? I trap his head, bringing my hip close to his elbow in order to finish this armbar. So now let's attack the far arm when I cannot find the angle here for the near. I'm here on my Kazakh position. I'm going for the near arm submission anyways, but sometimes the guy starts turning his thumb around his shoulder, moving his shoulder, and I can't quite find the angle to submit here. So I'm going to start attacking this arm. This arm here is also in position of attack. I'm going to let go the arm that I'm controlling, let go his elbow. I'm going to push his shoulder down. I want his shoulder glued on the mat. My arm here, my elbow, I find his elbow right behind his elbow here, right? So if I push his shoulder down and I push his wrist down with my head, I will have the arm bar here, right? So from this position, I'm trying to work on the near side arm bar. I'm having trouble, I'm not finding the angle. Push the shoulder down, align my elbow under his elbow if necessary, meet his wrist with my hand, with my neck here, right? My head pinches his wrist against my shoulder here, so his arm is trying harder for him to keep rotating his thumb and his arm there. Push his shoulder down, elbow up, head down for the finish. Okay. Sometimes, if I can even, in order to lift his elbow a little more, I can disconnect my hand from my head here. I punch my hand up, pinch his wrist in between my head and my shoulder so he doesn't rotate his wrist, escaping the submission. And of course, I can keep playing both arms here. Oh, I don't find this arm here. I go back to this one, right? Now, if I cannot get under his elbow, I can always get under my leg here, right? Hamstring, pop my hip against his elbow. Oh, I don't find the angle. I go back here, I keep playing these two here. Now there are many ways to attack that far arm armbar, right? Let's do a little variation here that's very useful too. So I'm still here on the Kazakhstan position, same beginning. I'm gonna pass my leg over and I have near side armbar and far side armbar, right? But again, sometimes I don't find the angle on either one here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just come on top, bring my knee down here in order to now use more gravity in order to attack his arm here. So bring that knee down, wrapping around his head, and I have a reverse armbar here. Pay attention to the final position of my body. I have both knees and my forehead touching on the mat in a tripod position. Slide again my neck next to his wrist. I'm gonna pull his elbow up, right? I'm putting downward pressure now, way more pressure now. Pulling his elbow up, still pinning his wrist between my head and my shoulder so I keep his thumb pointing up, right? Since I'm so heavy on top of the guy here, I can even let go the shoulder control here and use both arms here to pull his elbow up. Right? He cannot lift his shoulder that much because his head is strapped and have a lot of weight on top.